Every evening at exactly 6 o'clock an old wooden table was set for people, for plates, for glasses, for spoons. But only 3 people ever sat down. The 4th chair remained empty. Every single day. The neighbors noticed it. Visitors noticed it. Even little children who passed by the window would sometimes ask, "Why doesn't anyone sit there?" The family never answered. Some believed the empty chair belonged to someone who had died. Others whispered that the old man had simply lost his mind. But they were all wrong, because the chair wasn't waiting for someone who was gone. It was waiting for someone who might still come home. The old man was named Thomas. Every evening before dinner he quietly stood beside that chair. He straightened it carefully, wiped away dust that wasn't there. Then, without saying a word, he smiled almost invisibly. His daughter Emily watched him every night. She wanted to ask, but she already knew the answer. Their mother had stopped asking many years ago, because some questions only reopen old wounds. Outside the world kept moving. Cars passed. Children laughed. Neighbors hurried home. But inside that little house time had stopped 20 years earlier. And every evening one empty chair silently reminded them of the promise Thomas had never broken. 20 years earlier that chair had never been empty. A young man always sat there. His name was Daniel. He was Thomas's only son. Every evening the family shared dinner together. They laughed, told stories, argued about small things, and dreamed about the future. Thomas believed those evenings would last forever. He was wrong. One autumn afternoon Daniel came home holding a small envelope. His hands were trembling. "Dad, I've been accepted." Thomas smiled. "Accepted where?" Daniel took a deep breath. "A university overseas. They offered me a full scholarship." For a few seconds no one spoke. His mother began to cry. Not because she was sad, but because she was proud. Thomas forced a smile, then quietly asked, "When do you leave?" "In 2 weeks." The room became silent. That evening for the first time the food grew cold before anyone touched it. Thomas stared at the empty plate in front of him. Not because Daniel had already left, but because for the first time he realized one day this chair might truly be empty. 2 weeks later the whole family stood at the train station. Thomas hugged his son longer than ever before. Then he whispered something only Daniel could hear. "If life ever becomes too heavy, this chair will always be waiting for you." Daniel smiled. "I promise I'll come home." The train doors closed. The whistle echoed. And neither of them knew those simple words would become the longest promise of their lives. At first Daniel called every Sunday. No matter how busy he never forgot. Thomas would sit beside the telephone long before it rang. When he finally heard his son's voice, his face lit up like sunrise. The conversations were never long, but they were enough. Daniel spoke about his studies, his new friends, the strange language, the snow he had never seen before. Thomas listened to every word as if collecting small treasures. Months became years. The calls became shorter, then less frequent. Life grew busier, work, responsibilities, distance. One day Daniel said, "Dad, I can't come home this Christmas. I promise next year." Thomas smiled so his son wouldn't hear the disappointment. "Of course, we'll be waiting." Another year passed. Another promise. Another empty chair. Then one winter morning the telephone rang. Thomas answered immediately. But it wasn't Daniel. It was someone else. A quiet voice speaking from another country. After that call Thomas never told anyone what he had heard. Not even his wife. He simply walked into the dining room, pulled out Daniel's chair, touched it gently, and whispered so softly that only silence could hear him. I'll keep my promise until you keep yours. From that day on, every evening at exactly 6 o'clock, the table was set for 4. Years passed. Thomas's hair turned completely white. His hands grew weaker. But one thing never changed. Every evening at exactly 6 o'clock, he set the table for 4. Many people told him to stop. He isn't coming back. You're only hurting yourself. Thomas would simply smile. A promise isn't something you keep only when it's easy. One rainy evening there was a knock at the front door. Emily opened it. A young woman stood outside. Beside her was a little boy holding her hand. The woman looked nervous. I'm sorry to come without warning. My name is Anna. I knew your son. The room fell silent. Thomas slowly stood up. His hands began to tremble. Anna reached into her bag and carefully took out a worn leather notebook. It belonged to Daniel. He asked me if anything ever happened to bring this to his family. Thomas held the notebook against his chest. He couldn't speak. Anna looked down, then quietly continued. Daniel never stopped talking about home. He always said my father still leaves my chair at the table. Tears filled Thomas's eyes. Anna gently placed her hand on the little boy's shoulder. This is your grandson. For years I didn't know how to find you. I finally did. The little boy looked at Thomas with uncertain eyes. Then in a tiny voice, he asked, Grandpa, may I sit here? He pointed to the empty chair. Thomas looked at that chair for a long moment. 20 years of waiting. 20 years of hope. 20 years of keeping one simple promise. With tears running down his face, he gently nodded. Yes, it's been waiting for you. For the first time in 20 years, the 4th chair was no longer empty. Before we close tonight's story, I'd like to leave you with one question. Is there someone you've been meaning to call to forgive or simply tell I'm still here? Sometimes one small promise kept with love can travel farther than we ever imagine. Until next time, keep your light alive.